Imagine being trapped in a world where everything you've worked for, every word you've spoken, and every step you've taken is twisted into lies. Imagine being accused of things you never did, doors being slammed in your face, and people you trusted turning away, all because someone decided to paint a false picture of you. Now, what if I told you that even in the midst of betrayal and deception, there is a way to turn the tables, to reclaim your truth, and to rise stronger than ever before? Today, I'm going to take you on a journey, a story of cunning, patience, and ultimate vindication. You'll see how careful observation, strategic thinking, and quiet strength can dismantle false narratives, even when they come from the people you least expect. You'll witness how preparation and timing can transform helplessness into empowerment, and how truth, when wielded wisely, cannot be denied. By the end of this story, you won't just be inspired. You'll understand the power of resilience, the value of patience, and the unstoppable force that comes from knowing your own worth. Stay with me, because every moment of this journey holds a lesson that could change the way you face your own challenges forever. False accusations don't just damage a reputation, they quietly erase a person's future before it even begins. It starts subtly, almost invisibly, with a missed call that never comes back, an interview that seems promising but ends in polite rejection, a shift in tone that feels off but can't be proven. At first it's confusing. There's effort, preparation, honesty, yet something unseen keeps closing doors. Over time, confusion turns into a gnawing suspicion that something is being said behind the scenes, something powerful enough to outweigh truth, something that paints a picture so convincing that no one bothers to ask questions. Being labeled a thief isn't just an accusation, it's a brand that sticks, heavy and suffocating. It rewrites how others see every action, every word, every intention. Even silence becomes suspicious. Every attempt to move forward is shadowed by doubt, not self-doubt at first, but the doubt of others, the kind that lingers in their eyes and reshapes their decisions. And the worst part is, there's no battlefield to stand on, no clear moment to defend against. The damage is done in whispers, in private conversations, in warnings disguised as concern. What makes it unbearable is not just the accusation itself, but the source. When the ones who are supposed to protect, guide, and believe instead become the architects of that false narrative, it fractures something deeper than trust. It creates a loneliness that isn't about being alone, but about being unheard, unseen, and deliberately misrepresented. It forces a person to live in a reality where truth has no voice, where innocence has no witness. Days turn into months, and the pattern repeats, rejection after rejection, each one reinforcing a lie that was never spoken aloud to the one it affects the most. The mind begins to question everything. Every memory, every interaction, searching for a mistake that was never made. But beneath that pressure, something else begins to form, a quiet awareness, a realization that this isn't coincidence, that the obstacles are not random, and that the story being told isn't the one being lived. And in that realization, something shifts, not outwardly, not yet, but internally, where pain starts hardening into clarity, where confusion begins to shape itself into understanding, and where the first seeds of silent resistance begin to take root. Parents are often seen as the first source of truth in a person's life, the ones whose words carry unquestioned authority in the outside world. When that authority is twisted, it becomes something far more dangerous than open hostility. It doesn't look like sabotage at first. It looks like concern, like guidance, like subtle interference that feels almost protective on the surface. But underneath, it's a carefully controlled narrative, one designed to shape how others see someone without ever giving them a chance to speak for themselves. Abusing that position of trust means leveraging credibility that was never earned in the eyes of outsiders, but simply assumed. Employers, relatives, acquaintances, they don't question a parent's warning easily. A quiet comment like, "just be careful," or "they've had issues before," is enough to plant doubt that grows faster than truth can catch up. It doesn't require evidence, only repetition and timing. Said at the right moment, to the right person, it becomes more powerful than any resume, any achievement, any honest attempt to build a life independently. What makes this form of control so suffocating is how invisible it is. There's no confrontation, no accusation spoken directly. Instead, decisions start changing in rooms never entered. Opinions are formed before introductions even happen, and opportunities disappear without explanation. The person at the center of it all is left trying to fix something they can't even see, constantly adjusting, improving, questioning themselves, while the real cause remains hidden behind a mask of parental concern. It's not just about control over reputation, it's about control over identity. By repeatedly framing someone in a certain way, especially in critical moments, it limits how far they can move, how high they can reach, and how confidently they can stand. Over time, this pressure begins to close in, not just externally but internally, as the line between who they are and who they're being portrayed as starts to blur under constant strain. The cruelty lies in the contrast between expectation and reality. Society teaches that parents advocate, defend, and uplift, so when the opposite happens, it doesn't just create conflict, it creates disbelief. Others struggle to accept it, which makes the truth even harder to prove. The manipulation thrives in that disbelief, growing stronger each time it goes unquestioned, each time it's accepted without challenge, tightening its grip not through force, but through quiet, consistent distortion of reality. Silent suffering doesn't arrive all at once, it builds in layers, each disappointment adding weight to something that can't be openly expressed. At first, there's effort, applications sent with hope, interviews attended with quiet determination, every answer carefully chosen, every step taken with the belief that things will eventually align. But when opportunities keep slipping away without clear reason, the silence begins to grow heavier. It's not just about failure, it's about the absence of explanation, the lingering question of what went wrong when everything seemed right. The outside world continues as if nothing is happening, while internally, a storm of confusion and frustration starts to take shape. There's no clear enemy to confront, no mistake to correct, no feedback that points toward improvement. Just closed doors, polite smiles that hide rejection, and conversations that end too quickly. Over time, that silence begins to isolate, creating a space where thoughts echo louder than reality, where every possibility is examined and re-examined in search of a reason that never reveals itself. What makes it more difficult is the inability to share the struggle without sounding uncertain or defensive. Explaining repeated failures without a visible cause often leads to judgment or doubt, as if the problem must lie within. So the suffering stays contained, locked behind composed expressions and rehearsed reassurances that everything is fine. Each day becomes a performance of normalcy, while internally, the pressure continues to build, slowly eroding confidence. As opportunities disappear, so does the sense of direction. Plans that once felt clear begin to blur, and motivation starts to waver under the weight of constant setbacks. It's not a lack of effort or ambition, but the feeling of being stuck in a cycle that doesn't respond to effort at all. That's where silent suffering becomes most dangerous, not in the pain itself, but in how quietly it reshapes belief, turning hope into hesitation and determination into doubt. And yet, beneath all of it, something remains unspoken, but persistent. A quiet endurance that refuses to break completely, even when answers are absent and progress feels impossible. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention, but it stays, holding everything together just enough to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead feels uncertain and unseen. The emotional weight of being labeled a thief is not something that sits on the surface. It sinks deep, attaching itself to identity in ways that are difficult to separate. It's not just a word, it becomes a shadow that follows into every interaction, every opportunity, every attempt to be seen for who one truly is. Even in moments where nothing is said, the possibility that others might already believe it changes the way every step is taken, every word is chosen, every expression is controlled. At first, there's disbelief, a refusal to accept that such a label could exist without cause. It feels unreal, almost absurd, because it contradicts everything known internally. But as time passes and patterns begin to form, missed chances, hesitant reactions, subtle distance from others, that disbelief slowly shifts into a heavy awareness. A label doesn't need to be spoken aloud to have power. Its presence is felt in the way trust is withheld, in the way eyes linger just a second too long, in the way conversations feel guarded. Carrying that kind of accusation creates a constant state of self-monitoring. Every action becomes deliberate, every movement calculated to avoid misinterpretation. Simple things that once felt natural begin to feel loaded with risk, as if even the smallest mistake could confirm something that was never true to begin with. It builds a kind of invisible pressure where the goal is no longer just to succeed, but to prove innocence in a world that isn't actively asking for proof, yet quietly expects it. What makes the weight unbearable is the lack of a clear way to remove it. There's no single conversation that can undo it, no simple explanation that can erase it. It exists in perception, and perception doesn't change easily, especially when it's been shaped by repetition and authority. That creates a feeling of being trapped inside a version of oneself that was never chosen, forced to carry a reputation that doesn't belong, yet can't be easily discarded. Over time, this burden begins to influence not just how others are perceived, but how one sees oneself. Doubt creeps in, not because the accusation is believed, but because of its persistence, because of how often it interferes with reality. It becomes a quiet battle between knowing the truth and constantly being treated as if that truth doesn't exist, where the real struggle is not just clearing a name, but holding on to a sense of self that refuses to be defined by a lie. Isolation caused by damaged credibility doesn't happen in a loud, dramatic way. It unfolds quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the distance between one person and the rest of the world becomes impossible to ignore. It begins with small shifts, calls that stop coming, messages that go unanswered, invitations that are no longer extended. At first, these changes can be explained away as coincidence or timing, but as they repeat, a pattern emerges, one that points to something deeper than circumstance. When credibility is questioned, even silently, it alters how others choose to engage. Conversations become shorter, less open, more cautious. There's a subtle withdrawal, not always rooted in certainty but in hesitation, the kind that makes people keep their distance rather than risk being wrong. Trust, once assumed, now has to be earned under conditions that are unclear and constantly shifting. And without knowing exactly what is being believed or said, every attempt to reconnect feels like stepping into uncertainty. This isolation is different from simply being alone. It carries a sense of exclusion that isn't openly acknowledged, which makes it harder to confront. There's no direct rejection to respond to, no clear conflict to resolve. Instead, there's an invisible barrier that blocks connection, leaving behind interactions that feel surface level and incomplete. Over time, this lack of genuine connection begins to wear down emotional resilience, creating a space where loneliness feels heavier because it's surrounded by people, yet untouched by real understanding. What deepens the isolation is the awareness that it's rooted in something untrue, something that has been accepted without question. That awareness creates a tension between wanting to explain and not knowing where to begin, between needing to defend and having no clear accusation to address. It becomes easier to withdraw than to constantly face uncertain reactions, easier to stay silent than to risk being misunderstood again. As this distance grows, it starts to reshape daily life. Social circles shrink, opportunities to build new connections feel limited, and even moments that should bring comfort are overshadowed by the sense that something isn't right. The world begins to feel less accessible, not because it has changed entirely, but because the way it responds has shifted just enough to create separation. And within that separation, there's a quiet struggle to hold on to a sense of belonging in a space that no longer feels fully open or welcoming. Repeated job rejections without explanation create a pattern that slowly erodes both clarity and confidence. At first, each rejection feels like a single, isolated event, disappointing but understandable in a competitive world. There's still optimism, a belief that the next opportunity will be different, that effort and persistence will eventually lead somewhere meaningful. Applications are refined, skills are sharpened, interviews are approached with preparation and focus. But when the same outcome keeps returning, without any clear reason, that optimism begins to fracture. What makes it particularly unsettling is the silence that follows each attempt. There's no feedback to learn from, no indication of what went wrong, no direction for improvement, just polite emails, brief conversations, or sometimes nothing at all. That absence of information becomes its own kind of answer, one that leaves too much room for doubt to grow. The mind starts searching for patterns, analyzing every detail, tone of voice, choice of words, moments during interviews, trying to identify a flaw that might explain the outcome. Over time, the rejections stop feeling random. They begin to feel connected, as if there's an unseen factor influencing each decision. That realization doesn't arrive suddenly, it builds gradually, shaped by repetition. Each missed opportunity reinforces the feeling that something beyond effort or qualification is at play. And without knowing what that factor is, Every new application carries a weight that wasn't there before, a quiet expectation that the result may not change no matter how much is done differently. This cycle begins to affect more than just professional progress. It seeps into daily thoughts, altering motivation and perception. Tasks that once felt purposeful start to feel uncertain, as if the outcome is already decided before the process even begins. Confidence becomes harder to sustain, not because of a lack of ability, but because of a lack of results that reflect that ability. It creates a disconnect between effort and reward, where hard work no longer guarantees even a fair chance. Despite all of this, there's a persistence that continues, even if it becomes quieter over time. Applications are still sent, interviews still attended, but with a growing awareness that something isn't adding up. That awareness doesn't stop the effort, but it changes its tone, turning what was once driven by hope into something more cautious, more measured, as the search for answers becomes just as important as the search for opportunity. The realization that sabotage is coming from within the family doesn't arrive as a single, clear moment. It forms slowly, piece by piece, as scattered experiences begin to connect in ways that can no longer be ignored. At first, the idea feels impossible, almost unthinkable. Doubt turns outward, searching for external reasons, competition, bad timing, simple misfortune. It's easier to believe in those explanations than to question the intentions of those who are supposed to offer support and protection. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves over time. Conversations start to feel different, subtle remarks begin to stand out, and certain reactions no longer align with what is expected. There are moments that seem too coincidental. Opportunities disappearing shortly after being mentioned, people acting with hesitation before even getting to know the full story. Each instance alone might be dismissed, but together they begin to form something harder to overlook. This growing awareness creates a tension that is difficult to process. On one hand, there is the instinct to trust, built over years of familiarity and expectation. On the other, there is a quiet but persistent sense that something isn't right. That conflict doesn't resolve easily, it lingers, forcing a constant reevaluation of past interactions. Words that once seemed harmless begin to take on new meaning, and memories are revisited with a different perspective, searching for signs that were missed before. The most unsettling part is not just the possibility of betrayal, but the realization of how calculated it might be. If the sabotage is indeed coming from within, it means it has likely been happening over time, carefully placed in moments where it would have the greatest impact while remaining hidden. That thought shifts everything. It turns what once felt like random misfortune into something intentional, something designed to influence outcomes without being directly visible. As this understanding deepens, it changes the way every interaction is experienced. Trust becomes cautious, conversations are approached with a new level of awareness, and even silence begins to feel significant. It's no longer just about navigating the outside world, it's about recognizing that the source of resistance may be much closer than expected. That realization doesn't immediately bring clarity or resolution, but it marks a turning point, where confusion begins to give way to a more focused, if unsettling, understanding of what has been happening all along. Betrayal always carries weight, but when it comes from parents, it cuts into something far deeper than trust. It unsettles the very foundation a person builds their sense of safety on. There is an unspoken expectation that no matter what happens in the outside world, there is at least one place where intentions are genuine, where support is not conditional, where words are meant to protect rather than harm. When that expectation is broken, the impact is not immediate and explosive, but slow and disorienting, spreading through thoughts and emotions in ways that are difficult to contain. At first, the mind resists the idea. It searches for alternative explanations, tries to reinterpret actions in a more forgiving light, holds on to the belief that there must be some misunderstanding. That resistance isn't weakness, it's a natural attempt to preserve something that feels essential. Accepting betrayal from strangers is one thing, it fits within a world where not everyone is trustworthy. But accepting it from parents requires confronting a reality that feels fundamentally wrong, almost incompatible with everything that has been believed. As the possibility becomes harder to deny, the emotional response deepens. It's not just anger or sadness, but a layered reaction that includes confusion, disbelief, and a quiet sense of loss. The loss isn't only about what was done, but about what was expected and never truly existed. It creates a fracture between past and present, where memories are no longer solid, where moments once seen as caring or neutral begin to feel uncertain under new understanding. This kind of betrayal also isolates in a unique way. It's difficult to explain to others without being met with doubt or discomfort, because it challenges a widely held belief about what family represents. That makes it harder to seek validation or even express the full extent of what is being felt. Instead, much of it is processed internally, where emotions cycle through without clear resolution, building pressure without a clear outlet. Over time, the realization reshapes perception. It changes how trust is given, how relationships are approached, and how vulnerability is managed. There's a growing awareness that not all connections are what they appear to be, and that closeness does not always guarantee honesty or goodwill. That awareness doesn't come with immediate strength. It often arrives with heaviness, forcing a redefinition of what safety and loyalty truly mean in a world where even the closest bonds can carry unexpected harm. The struggle to prove innocence without evidence is a battle fought in a space where truth exists internally but lacks the external weight needed to be believed. It creates a situation where certainty on one side meets doubt on the other, and no matter how firmly the truth is held, it feels fragile in the face of perception. There's no document to present, no witness to call, no moment to point to and say, "This is where everything went wrong." Instead, there is only a consistent denial of something that was never done, repeated in the hope that it might eventually be enough. What makes this struggle so exhausting is the imbalance it creates. Accusations, even when false, carry an inherent power because they introduce the possibility of wrongdoing. That possibility alone is often enough to shift how others think, planting a seed of doubt that doesn't require proof to grow, but defending against it requires something far more solid, something that can't always be produced. It forces a person into a position where they are expected to disprove something invisible, to argue against a narrative that exists without a clear source or structure. Every attempt to explain feels incomplete, not because the truth is lacking, but because the framework to support it is missing. Words begin to feel insufficient, as if they dissolve the moment they are spoken, leaving behind the same uncertainty they were meant to resolve. This creates a cycle where silence feels safer than speaking. Yet silence can be interpreted as guilt, reinforcing the very perception that is being fought against. Over time, this struggle begins to take an internal toll. It introduces a constant tension between knowing and needing to prove, between holding on to the truth and feeling like that truth is not enough. It can lead to second-guessing, not of actions, but of how those actions are perceived, creating a heightened awareness of how easily reality can be distorted. Despite all of this, there remains a quiet persistence, a refusal to accept a false identity simply because it is easier for others to believe. It doesn't always show itself through confrontation or argument, but through a steady commitment to continue forward, even when validation is absent. In that persistence, there is a subtle form of resistance, one that exists not in loud declarations, but in the unwavering decision to stand by a truth that cannot yet be fully proven. The loss of confidence and the emergence of an identity crisis don't happen suddenly. They develop quietly, shaped by repeated experiences that begin to contradict everything once believed about oneself. At the core, there is still a clear sense of truth, an understanding of one's own intentions, values, and actions. But when the outside world consistently responds in ways that don't reflect that truth, it creates a deep and unsettling disconnect. Over time, that disconnect begins to blur the line between self-perception and external judgment. Confidence is often built on feedback, on the reinforcement that effort leads to results, and that ability is recognized. When that reinforcement disappears, replaced by rejection or doubt without explanation, it starts to weaken the foundation that confidence stands on. It's not just about failing to achieve something, it's about not understanding why, about feeling as though the rules have changed without notice. That uncertainty makes it difficult to trust one's own decisions, leading to hesitation where there was once certainty. As this pattern continues, it begins to affect identity in a deeper way. Questions that were once simple, who am I, what am I capable of, become harder to answer with conviction. There's a growing tension between what is known internally and what seems to be reflected externally. When others consistently respond with skepticism or distance, it can feel as though there is something unseen that defines how one is perceived, something that overrides personal truth. This creates a kind of internal fragmentation. Part of the mind holds on to clarity, insisting on the reality of one's character and actions, while another part begins to absorb the doubt that surrounds it. Not because the accusation is believed, but because of its persistence, because of how often it appears to influence outcomes. That repetition has a way of wearing down certainty, not by proving anything, but by constantly challenging it. In this state, even small decisions can feel heavier. There's a tendency to overanalyze, to question whether actions might be misunderstood, to anticipate negative interpretations before they even happen. It becomes less about expressing who one is and more about managing how one might be perceived. And in that shift, identity becomes less stable, less rooted, shaped not only by personal truth but by the constant pressure of an external narrative that refuses to align with it. Society's quick judgment, without hearing the truth, operates on a kind of quiet efficiency, where decisions are made rapidly, often based on fragments of information rather than a complete understanding. It doesn't require malice to exist. It thrives on assumption, on the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with whatever seems most plausible or convenient. When a negative label is introduced, especially one that suggests dishonesty or wrongdoing, it carries a weight that makes people cautious. That caution, even if unspoken, becomes the basis for judgment before any real conversation takes place. In many cases, people don't actively seek the full story, because doing so requires time, effort, and a willingness to question what they've already been told. It's easier to accept a warning at face value than to investigate it, especially when it comes from a source that appears credible. A single suggestion of doubt can be enough to shift perception, turning neutrality into suspicion without any direct evidence. That shift doesn't always present itself openly. It often shows through subtle behavior, hesitation in tone, guarded responses, decisions that lean toward avoidance rather than risk for the person being judged. This creates an environment where the truth feels distant, almost unreachable. There's rarely an opportunity to present it fully, to explain without interruption or preconceived notions shaping the outcome. Instead, interactions are filtered through an assumption that has already taken hold, making it difficult for anything said to be received without bias. Even honesty can be questioned when the listener is already leaning toward doubt. This dynamic reinforces itself over time. Each decision made without hearing the full story strengthens the initial assumption, making it seem more valid simply because it has been acted upon repeatedly. It creates a chain reaction where one person's quiet judgment influences another's, spreading a perception that grows without needing to be constantly restated. In that way, the truth becomes less about what actually happened and more about what is collectively believed. The most challenging part of this kind of judgment is its invisibility. It rarely announces itself directly, leaving behind no clear moment to confront or correct. Instead, it exists in the space between actions and outcomes, shaping experiences without openly revealing its presence. And within that space, the struggle is not just to be understood, but to be given the chance to be heard at all, in a world that often decides before it listens. Hidden strength developed through adversity doesn't appear in obvious ways. It forms quietly, often without recognition, shaped by moments that test endurance more than ability. When challenges are constant and answers are unclear, there is no dramatic turning point where everything suddenly becomes easier. Instead, there is a gradual shift in how pressure is handled, how setbacks are absorbed, and how persistence continues even when results are absent. It's a kind of strength that grows not from success, but from the repeated decision to keep moving despite uncertainty. At the beginning, adversity feels overwhelming, unpredictable, and unfair. There is resistance, frustration, and a desire to understand why things are happening the way they are. But when those questions go unanswered, something begins to change. The focus moves away from seeking immediate resolution and towards simply enduring the moment. That endurance is not passive, it requires constant adjustment, a steady effort to maintain balance while everything else feels unstable. Over time, this process builds resilience in ways that are not immediately visible. It sharpens awareness, making it easier to notice patterns, to read situations more carefully, and to respond with intention rather than reaction. It also creates a deeper sense of self-reliance, because external validation becomes less dependable. When support is limited or inconsistent, the ability to stand firm internally becomes essential, and that necessity strengthens the foundation from within. This kind of strength is often misunderstood because it doesn't present itself loudly, it doesn't seek attention or recognition, and it doesn't rely on outward displays of confidence. Instead, it exists in small, consistent actions. The choice to try again after rejection, the ability to remain composed under pressure, the quiet determination to continue even when progress is slow or invisible. These moments may seem insignificant on their own, but together they form a resilience that is difficult to break. As adversity continues, this hidden strength begins to influence perspective. Challenges are no longer seen purely as obstacles, but as conditions that require adaptation. There is less dependence on ideal circumstances and more focus on what can be controlled within them. And while the external situation may not change immediately, the internal response becomes steadier, more grounded, shaped by experience rather than expectation, creating a form of strength that doesn't need to be declared to be real. A wise and observant grandmother noticing everything is not something that reveals itself through loud confrontation or immediate action. It exists in the quiet details, in the way small inconsistencies are picked up and remembered. There is a patience in her awareness, a tendency to watch rather than react, to listen more than speak. While others may overlook subtle changes or dismiss them as coincidence, she pays attention to patterns, the repeated disappointments, the unspoken tension in conversations, the way opportunities seem to disappear without reason. Her understanding doesn't come from a single moment, but from a lifetime of experience that has taught her how people behave when something isn't right. She notices the hesitation in voices, the careful choice of words, the gaps between what is said and what is meant. These observations are not rushed into judgment, instead, they are held, compared, and slowly pieced together until they form a clearer picture. There is a calmness in the way she processes things, as if she knows that truth reveals itself best when given time. What makes her role significant is not just that she sees what others don't, but that she sees without being seen. Her awareness remains quiet, almost invisible, allowing her to gather understanding without interference. She doesn't immediately question or confront, because she recognizes that doing so too early could close off the very information she needs. Instead, she allows situations to unfold naturally, watching how people act when they believe no one is paying close attention. There is also a depth of empathy in her observation. She doesn't just see events, she senses the emotional weight behind them. She notices the strain that isn't spoken about, the effort to appear unaffected, the subtle signs of someone carrying more than they express. This understanding shapes how she responds, not with alarm, but with a steady presence that offers quiet reassurance without demanding explanation. As her awareness deepens, it becomes clear that what she is witnessing is not random or accidental. The pieces begin to align, forming a pattern that points toward something intentional. And while she may not reveal her conclusions immediately, there is a certainty growing beneath the surface, a readiness that suggests she is not only observing, but preparing in her own way, guided by a clarity that comes from seeing the full picture when others only see fragments. A grandmother quietly preparing a safety net is not an act driven by impulse, it is shaped by foresight, patience, and a deep understanding of how situations can unfold when others are not paying attention. Her actions are subtle, almost invisible to those who are not looking closely. There are no grand announcements, no immediate confrontations, just small, deliberate steps taken over time, each one designed to create stability in a situation that appears uncertain from the outside. She begins by observing, confirming what she has already sensed, allowing patterns to repeat just enough to remove any doubt. Once that clarity settles in, her approach becomes intentional. She doesn't rush to fix things directly, because she understands that some problems cannot be solved through confrontation alone. Instead, she focuses on creating options, building quiet layers of protection that can be relied upon when the right moment arrives. This preparation often takes practical forms: documents organized and secured, records kept carefully, conversations remembered with precision. She pays attention to details others might overlook, knowing that those details can later become the difference between doubt and certainty. At the same time, she may begin to establish connections, reaching out in ways that seem ordinary on the surface but are guided by a deeper purpose. These interactions are not random, they are chosen with care, forming a network that can support when needed. What makes her approach powerful is the absence of urgency in how she carries it out. There is no visible pressure, no sign that anything unusual is happening. To others, everything appears normal, unchanged. But beneath that calm surface, something steady is being built, piece by piece. It's a form of protection that doesn't rely on immediate results, but on being ready for the moment when preparation becomes necessary. There is also a quiet confidence in her actions, a belief that timing matters just as much as intention. She understands that revealing too much too soon could weaken what she is trying to achieve, so she waits, allowing circumstances to develop naturally, knowing that when the time comes, what she has prepared will speak more clearly than any argument. Her safety net is not just about preventing harm. It is about ensuring that when truth finally has the space to emerge, it is supported, undeniable, and strong enough to withstand whatever resistance it might face. Secret documentation of truth and evidence is not created in a moment of panic. It is built gradually, with intention and precision, often without anyone realizing it exists. It begins with awareness, the understanding that words can be denied, twisted, or forgotten, but records, when kept carefully, have a permanence that is difficult to challenge. This awareness shapes every step, turning ordinary moments into opportunities to preserve what is real beneath what is being said. Each piece of documentation may seem small on its own, a date noted, a conversation remembered, a detail recorded exactly as it happened. There is no rush to gather everything at once. Instead, it becomes a consistent habit, a quiet discipline of capturing events as they unfold. The strength of it lies not in any single entry, but in the accumulation, in how individual fragments begin to connect over time, forming a clear and structured account that reflects patterns rather than isolated incidents. There is also a careful balance in how this is done. It must remain discreet, unnoticed by those who might try to interfere or alter the narrative. This requires patience and restraint, the ability to observe without reacting outwardly, to listen without revealing intention. It turns attention into a tool, where every interaction is both experienced and, in some way, preserved. Not everything is written down immediately, but what matters is retained with clarity, ensuring that when it is recorded, it is accurate and complete. What makes this process powerful is its objectivity. While emotions may run high in the moment, the documentation itself remains steady, focused on facts rather than feelings. This separation is crucial because it allows the truth to stand on its own, without being weakened by interpretation. Over time, this creates a record that is not easily dismissed, one that speaks through consistency and detail rather than volume. As more evidence is gathered, a shift begins to occur internally. The sense of helplessness that comes from being misunderstood starts to ease, replaced by a quiet confidence that the truth is no longer unprotected. There is still no immediate need to reveal it, no urgency to confront, but there is a growing certainty that when the time comes, what has been documented will provide clarity in a way that words alone never could. Strategic patience instead of emotional reaction is not a natural response in the face of betrayal and injustice. It is a discipline that develops when reacting immediately proves ineffective or even harmful. The instinct to respond, to defend, to confront, to expose everything at once, is strong, especially when the truth feels urgent and the damage feels ongoing. But over time, it becomes clear that reacting too quickly often plays into the very situation that caused the harm, giving others the chance to deny, deflect, or reshape the narrative before it can fully surface. Choosing patience in that environment is not about weakness or avoidance, it is about control. It requires stepping back from the immediate emotional pull and recognizing that timing can influence outcomes as much as truth itself. Instead of trying to correct everything in a single moment, the focus shifts toward understanding the situation more completely, observing how actions unfold, and allowing patterns to become undeniable. This approach turns waiting into a form of preparation rather than passivity. There is a quiet strength in holding back when every instinct pushes forward. Emotions do not disappear, they are felt, processed, and acknowledged, but they are not allowed to dictate action. This creates space for clearer thinking, for decisions that are not driven by urgency but by intention. It also prevents unnecessary exposure, ensuring that when something is revealed or addressed, it is done from a position of strength rather than reaction. Over time, this patience changes perspective. Situations that once felt chaotic begin to show structure, and what seemed unpredictable starts to follow a pattern. This clarity allows for more precise responses, where actions are chosen carefully rather than impulsively. It becomes less about proving a point in the moment, and more about ensuring that when the truth is presented, it cannot be easily dismissed or ignored. There is also an element of endurance in this approach. Waiting requires trust, not in others, but in the process being followed. It means accepting that resolution may not come immediately, that there will be moments where silence feels uncomfortable or even unfair. But within that waiting, something builds. A readiness that is grounded in understanding rather than emotion, a steady confidence that when the right moment arrives, the response will carry more weight because it was not rushed, not forced, but prepared with intention and clarity. The turning point when truth begins to surface is rarely loud or dramatic at first. It often starts as a subtle shift, a small crack in a narrative that once seemed solid and unquestioned. For a long time, everything may have felt controlled, as if the story being told was fixed and unchangeable. But truth has a way of pressing against that control, slowly finding openings where it can begin to show itself. It might appear through a minor inconsistency, a detail that doesn't align, or a moment where someone pauses just a little too long, uncertain of what they've been led to believe. At this stage, the change is not immediately obvious to everyone. Some may still hold on to the original narrative, while others begin to question it quietly. There's a shift in energy, in the way conversations unfold, in the way certain topics are approached or avoided. Doubt, once directed in one direction, starts to move, no longer fixed but searching for clarity. This movement is subtle but significant, because it signals that the narrative is no longer fully in control. For the one who has been carrying the truth all along, this moment feels different, even if nothing outwardly has fully changed yet. There is a growing awareness that something is shifting, that the weight once carried alone is beginning to redistribute. It doesn't immediately erase the damage that has been done, but it creates space where the truth can exist outside of silence, where it can begin to take form in the minds of others. What makes this turning point powerful is not just the appearance of truth, but the timing of it. It comes after patience, after observation, after enough has been gathered and understood to support it. Because of that, it is not fragile or easily dismissed. Each small revelation connects to something else, forming a chain that becomes harder to ignore. It's no longer just a statement against a lie, it's a structure of consistency that begins to stand on its own. As this process continues, the balance starts to shift. The narrative that once dominated begins to weaken, not through force, but through exposure. And within that shift, there is a quiet sense of momentum building, as if something long held back is finally finding its way forward, not all at once, but steadily, with a certainty that comes from having waited until the truth could no longer remain hidden. Exposure of lies in a powerful, undeniable way does not rely on volume or aggression. It gains its strength from clarity, timing, and the weight of accumulated truth. For a long time, the false narrative may have moved freely, unchallenged because it was never directly confronted with something solid enough to stop it. But when the moment of exposure arrives, it is different. It is not based on emotion or reaction, but on evidence that has been carefully gathered, understood, and preserved. This kind of exposure doesn't begin with accusation, it begins with presentation. Facts are placed where they can be seen, one after another, not rushed, not forced, but allowed to speak in their own sequence. Each detail connects to the next, forming a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to deny. What once existed as separate, dismissible moments now appears as a consistent thread, revealing intention where there was once only suspicion. The power lies in how undeniable it becomes. There is no need for raised voices or dramatic confrontation because the truth carries its own weight. Attempts to interrupt or redirect only draw more attention to what is being revealed. The narrative that once seemed controlled starts to unravel under the pressure of consistency as contradictions become visible and explanations begin to falter. What was once accepted without question now demands scrutiny. For those witnessing it, the shift is immediate yet complex. There is a moment of realization where understanding replaces assumption, followed by a reevaluation of everything that was previously believed. It creates a kind of silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence that comes when something becomes clear in a way that words cannot easily respond to. In that space, the truth settles, not as an opinion, but as something concrete. For the one revealing it, the experience is not about triumph in the usual sense. It is steadier, more grounded. There is a release in no longer needing to explain or defend, in allowing what has been prepared to stand on its own. The burden of carrying the truth alone begins to lift, replaced by the certainty that it no longer exists in isolation. As the exposure continues, the balance fully shifts. What was hidden becomes visible, what was doubted becomes clear, and what was controlled begins to lose its hold, not through force, but through the simple, undeniable presence of truth presented at the right time, in the right way. Parents' manipulation backfiring publicly is a consequence that rarely happens instantly. It develops slowly, as carefully constructed control collides with evidence, preparation, and timing. For years, the manipulation may have seemed complete, almost invisible, shaping perceptions and limiting opportunities without anyone outside the family realizing the extent of it. Words spoken in private, warnings delivered subtly, and repeated insinuations created an invisible web, one that seemed unbreakable because those outside the inner circle were convinced by authority and trust. But no matter how meticulously a narrative is crafted, it is vulnerable when the truth is quietly prepared and strategically revealed. The public aspect of this backfire is what gives it its intensity. When lies that were meant to control perception begin to unravel in front of witnesses, the effect is immediate and unmistakable. It is not a quiet personal vindication. It is a confrontation of reality that forces those who have been deceived to reconsider everything they have assumed. Manipulations that once seemed so effective suddenly become transparent because the truth, carefully documented and patiently timed, cannot be ignored. Every contradiction, every inconsistency, every hidden effort emerges clearly, turning the tables on the manipulators without a single aggressive confrontation. What makes this situation even more potent is the social and psychological weight of witnessing authority undermined. Parents are figures whose words are traditionally trusted and rarely questioned, so when the reality of manipulation is exposed publicly, it shakes assumptions far beyond the immediate conflict. Others, who may have accepted the narrative blindly, are compelled to acknowledge the discrepancy, often reevaluating their own judgments and interactions. This amplification ensures that the backfire is not just personal, but observed, affecting reputation, influence, and credibility on a broader scale. For the person whose life was targeted, this moment carries more than satisfaction. It represents a shift from powerless observation to measured reclamation of agency. Years of careful patience, observation, and preparation converge to demonstrate that truth, when handled strategically, can overpower deception, regardless of who constructs it. It becomes clear that manipulation, no matter how subtle or seemingly authoritative, cannot withstand consistency, preparation, and timing. The public nature of the backfire reinforces a lesson in control and consequence. Manipulative efforts designed to suppress, intimidate, or discredit are inherently unstable when faced with evidence and clarity. Lies may function temporarily, but once they collide with organized truth, their collapse is undeniable. The effect is not just immediate exposure, it is a lasting shift in perception that challenges authority, asserts integrity, and transforms a long-term struggle into a decisive turning point visible to all who witness it. Restoring reputation piece by piece is a process that demands patience, consistency, and careful attention to detail. After years of false accusations and sabotage, the damage to how others perceive someone can feel almost irreversible. Doors that once seemed open have closed, opportunities are lost, and trust has been eroded. The challenge lies in rebuilding not just external perceptions, but also internal confidence, because the scars left by repeated doubt and rejection influence how one approaches each new interaction. Restoration is not immediate, nor is it dramatic, it is gradual, requiring deliberate actions that accumulate over time. The first step in this process is establishing credibility again, in small, tangible ways. Each success, however minor, becomes a building block, a piece of evidence that contradicts the false narrative. It could be completing a project, receiving recognition for skill or effort, or demonstrating reliability and integrity in consistent ways. These moments may seem ordinary, but to someone working to rebuild a reputation, they carry significant weight because they challenge assumptions silently, creating a foundation that is stronger than any single declaration or explanation. Alongside action, communication plays a subtle but essential role. Being transparent when appropriate, providing clarity where needed, and demonstrating accountability all contribute to reshaping perceptions. It is less about directly confronting the past and more about showing repeatedly that the current reality differs from the previous story. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to reinforce competence and character, gradually reshaping how others understand who one is and what one represents. Equally important is patience. because reputations rarely recover instantly. Even when truth and consistency are present, it takes time for people to adjust their assumptions. Observers need repeated examples to shift from skepticism to trust. This process requires enduring moments where the past may still influence perception, while maintaining a steady commitment to authenticity and reliability. By focusing on long-term consistency rather than immediate vindication, the restoration builds credibility that is difficult to dispute. Finally, restoring a reputation also involves internal reconciliation. Believing in one's own worth and maintaining confidence are crucial because external perception cannot be entirely controlled. The combination of demonstrable integrity, consistent effort, and self-assurance slowly aligns reality with truth. Over time, the cumulative effect of these deliberate, repeated actions begins to reestablish respect and credibility, proving that even a reputation once tarnished by falsehoods can be carefully and systematically rebuilt, one step at a time. The role of timing in executing revenge is often more critical than the act itself, because even the most carefully prepared strategy can falter if revealed too early or too late. Timing determines the impact of every action, the clarity with which it is perceived, and the inevitability with which it cannot be ignored. Acting too soon may mean that evidence is incomplete, emotions are raw, or observers are not yet aware of the context, making the attempt less convincing or even counterproductive. Waiting too long, on the other hand, risks losing momentum, allowing others to bury the truth, or giving manipulators the chance to adjust their narrative before exposure. Understanding timing requires a combination of patience, observation, and foresight. It is not a passive waiting, but an active awareness of when circumstances align to maximize effect. Every detail, conversations, behaviors, missed opportunities, patterns of lies, must be tracked and considered in relation to how others will perceive them. Timing transforms what could be a simple revelation into a strategic, unavoidable turning point where the truth is not only clear, but impossible to ignore. The right moment ensures that preparation and evidence converge in a way that demonstrates control and authority, leaving no space for denial. Strategic timing also allows the person executing the revenge to maintain composure and clarity. By waiting for the moment when all pieces are in place, they reduce the risk of emotional reaction overshadowing logic, ensuring that the delivery is precise and effective. It turns patience into a weapon, transforming anticipation into leverage. Each prior act of observation and preparation becomes amplified because the context in which it is revealed is fully understood, and the audience is ready to witness it without distraction or doubt. Moreover, timing influences perception beyond the immediate act. Revealing the truth at the optimal moment creates maximum credibility because it demonstrates awareness, intelligence, and self-control. Observers see not just the revelation itself, but the method behind it, the careful orchestration that ensures it cannot be dismissed or misinterpreted. That perception amplifies the impact, turning what might have been a single corrective action into a statement of power, strategy, and resilience. Finally, timing in revenge transforms it from personal vindication into a broader lesson for others. It underscores that manipulation, deceit, or betrayal cannot withstand preparation and patience, and that calculated actions, delivered with precision, carry authority that impulsive reactions never achieve. By choosing the right moment, the person executing the revenge ensures that the truth is both seen and respected, and that the consequences of past actions are fully realized in a way that resonates far beyond the immediate conflict. Justice delivered without shouting, through proof, is a form of vindication that carries a weight far beyond words or emotional outbursts. When false accusations or manipulations have tarnished a reputation, it can be tempting to react loudly, to demand attention, or to confront the source directly. But while emotion may feel satisfying in the moment, it rarely creates lasting resolution. True justice, especially in situations where perception has been manipulated, relies on something more tangible, evidence that cannot be disputed, facts that speak louder than opinions, and outcomes that are undeniable in their clarity. The strength of justice delivered this way comes from its objectivity. When truth is carefully documented, observed, and prepared, it becomes impervious to denial or distortion. It does not rely on the audience being convinced by passion or rhetoric. It stands on a foundation that requires acknowledgement simply because the evidence exists. Each piece, when presented, connects logically to the next, creating a sequence that reveals intention, patterns, and reality. Lies, by contrast, crumble under the weight of consistency, because they cannot sustain the scrutiny of structured proof. Delivering justice through proof also allows for composure and strategic control. Rather than reacting impulsively to frustration or anger, the focus shifts to preparation and precision. Every action, every document, every witness or record becomes a tool in ensuring the truth is recognized. This approach minimizes risk, reduces the chance of counterattacks, and maximizes the impact of the revelation. Observers do not just see the truth, they experience it as an undeniable reality, reinforced by evidence rather than emotion. Moreover, this form of justice creates a long-lasting shift in perception. Unlike shouting or confrontation, which may fade once the moment passes, proof endures. Records, documentation, and carefully timed disclosures can continue to influence understanding long after the initial revelation. It is not about momentary satisfaction, it is about altering the narrative in a way that is permanent, leaving no room for reinterpretation or manipulation. The quiet power of proof-based justice lies in its inevitability. Lies that were once accepted without question are exposed as inconsistent, manipulations are revealed as deliberate, and credibility is restored through facts rather than argument. By relying on preparation, observation, and evidence, justice is delivered in a manner that is calm, deliberate, and ultimately unassailable, ensuring that truth prevails not because it is shouted, but because it cannot be denied. The satisfaction of witnessing the truth finally being recognized is an experience that develops slowly, often following a long period of patience, preparation, and resilience. For someone who has been falsely accused, sabotaged, or misrepresented, the burden of carrying the truth alone can feel heavy and isolating. Every attempt to clarify, to prove innocence, or to correct perception may have been ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. In those moments, the world seems indifferent, and the weight of injustice presses quietly but relentlessly. Yet, when the truth is finally recognized, when careful preparation, evidence, and strategic timing converge, the experience is profound, not because it is loud or dramatic, but because it validates the long struggle in a way that cannot be taken away. This recognition is deeply tied to the notion of inevitability. It is not merely about persuading others, it is about presenting circumstances so clearly and consistently that acknowledgement becomes unavoidable. Observers, whether friends, colleagues, or strangers, can no longer rely on the false narrative because it has been dismantled systematically. Each piece of evidence, every careful observation, and all of the patient steps taken to document and prepare culminate in a moment where reality and perception finally align. That alignment is what makes the satisfaction unique. It is the culmination of strategy, endurance, and clarity rather than chance or immediate emotional reaction. There is also a sense of relief intertwined with this satisfaction. For a long time, carrying the burden of unseen truth can create tension, doubt, and a constant need to defend oneself internally. When recognition arrives, the pressure of having to prove oneself diminishes because the world is no longer ignoring or dismissing the reality that has always existed. This relief is not just emotional, it carries a practical significance. Doors that were closed, trust that was withheld, and opportunities that were denied begin to shift as others adjust their perception based on evidence and clarity rather than rumor or manipulation. Finally, the satisfaction comes from a sense of justice achieved in a manner that is deliberate, thoughtful, and controlled. It is not fleeting or performative, it is grounded in the certainty that the truth has been presented in its most effective form, leaving no room for misinterpretation or denial. It validates not only the facts themselves but also the patience, strategy, and resilience that made the recognition possible, creating a lasting sense of closure and empowerment for the person who endured the struggle. The long-term impact on relationships after vindication is complex and multifaceted, because proving the truth does not simply erase the past or restore trust automatically. For someone who has been falsely accused, manipulated, or misrepresented, relationships are often strained or damaged before vindication even occurs. Friends, colleagues, and even family members may have been influenced by lies, doubts, or assumptions, creating distance, suspicion, or miscommunication that persists over time. The process of proving the truth, while necessary for restoring credibility, does not immediately repair the emotional and social dynamics that have been affected. Once vindication occurs, the first challenge is rebuilding trust. People who are misled may recognize the truth, But that acknowledgement does not automatically restore confidence. They may need time to reconcile the discrepancy between what they believed and what actually happened, and during this period, interactions can be tentative or cautious. For the person who endured the injustice, this requires patience and understanding, because frustration or expectation that relationships will instantly return to their previous state can create additional tension. Restoration is gradual, and it often involves repeated demonstrations of reliability, honesty, and consistency over time. Another layer of complexity is the re-evaluation of loyalty and boundaries. Vindication can clarify who was supportive, who was indifferent, and who may have contributed, directly or indirectly, to the spread of misinformation. This awareness influences future interactions and decisions about whom to trust and how closely to engage. Some relationships may strengthen because they were resilient enough to withstand doubt, while others may weaken or dissolve as individuals reassess their connections based on integrity and alignment with personal values. There is also an internal component to consider. Vindication often restores confidence and self-assurance, but it may also heighten sensitivity to future dynamics, because the experience of betrayal or misrepresentation leaves a lasting impression. The person who has endured the struggle may approach relationships with greater discernment, more cautious openness, and a clearer understanding of boundaries, which influences both personal and professional interactions. Over time, the long-term impact of vindication shapes a network of relationships that is more authentic, deliberate, and resilient. While some connections may never fully recover, others grow stronger and more meaningful because they are grounded in truth, understanding, and mutual respect. Vindication, therefore, is not just a moment of personal triumph. It is a turning point that reshapes relationships, redefines trust, and recalibrates the way connections are built and maintained in the future. The ultimate lesson learned from enduring betrayal and orchestrating vindication is one that combines resilience, foresight, and the value of patience into a framework for navigating life with clarity and strength. Experiencing false accusations or manipulation, especially from those expected to provide care or support, leaves a profound imprint on one's perception of trust, relationships, and personal boundaries. Initially, the focus is on survival, maintaining composure, proving innocence, and navigating a world that seems predisposed to believe the lie. But as time passes and the truth emerges, the experience transforms into a powerful source of insight that informs future decisions, behavior, and understanding of human nature. One of the core lessons is the importance of preparation. Nothing in the journey toward vindication happens by accident. Observation, documentation, strategic patience, and foresight all contribute to creating a foundation upon which truth can stand against falsehood. Preparing for potential manipulation, anticipating challenges, and having systems in place to safeguard integrity ensure that when the moment arrives to reveal the truth, it is undeniable. This preparation becomes a lasting skill, applicable not only in moments of conflict, but also in everyday life where accountability and foresight are essential. Another key insight is the value of patience and timing. Immediate reactions driven by emotion can often obscure clarity and reduce impact, while measured, deliberate action allows truth to unfold in a way that maximizes effect and preserves credibility. Learning when to act, when to wait, and when to observe fosters a sense of control even in situations that initially feel overwhelming. It teaches that strength is not measured solely by confrontation, but by the ability to navigate complexity with calm precision. Resilience emerges as a central theme. Carrying the burden of being misunderstood or falsely accused requires emotional endurance, self-trust, and the ability to maintain focus despite setbacks. That resilience strengthens identity, reinforces personal integrity, and cultivates confidence that can withstand future challenges. Alongside this comes the awareness of human behavior, the recognition that not everyone operates with honesty or goodwill, and that discernment is necessary to protect oneself and one's interests. Ultimately, the lesson is multifaceted. It emphasizes self-reliance, strategic thinking, the power of patience, and the enduring importance of truth. It demonstrates that injustice, no matter how persistent, can be overcome through preparation, persistence, and clarity, and that the process itself equips a person with skills and understanding that extend far beyond a single conflict. It is a reminder that adversity, when approached thoughtfully, becomes a teacher, providing wisdom, strength, and perspective that lasts a lifetime. The ultimate power of truth, preparation, and calculated action in overcoming betrayal is something that becomes apparent only after enduring the full weight of deception and manipulation. When someone you trust, especially your own parents, actively works to tarnish your reputation, it can feel like the world itself is closing in. Every door that should have been open seems barred. Every opportunity disappears, and the very identity you have built for yourself is called into question. In those moments, it is easy to feel powerless, to believe that no amount of honesty or effort can undo the damage that has been done. Yet it is precisely within these circumstances that the true strength of preparation and strategic thinking emerges. Preparation becomes the foundation on which recovery and vindication are built. It is not simply about defending yourself in the moment, but about anticipating challenges, documenting evidence, and creating a structure that allows the truth to emerge when it will have maximum impact. Every record kept, every reference secured, and every careful observation of behavior contributes to a body of proof that eventually becomes undeniable. This level of foresight requires discipline, patience, and a clear understanding of how timing influences perception. By preparing meticulously, what once seemed like chaos and unfairness is transformed into a situation where control can be regained. Truth itself is the most powerful tool in this process. Lies can spread quickly, especially when they come from authority figures or trusted individuals, but they are fragile under scrutiny. When supported by clear evidence and presented in a deliberate way, truth has a permanence that falsehood cannot match. It does not rely on emotion, drama, or confrontation. It simply exists and asserts itself against distortion. This allows vindication to occur organically, as others are compelled to reconcile what they believed with what is demonstrably real. Calculated action ties preparation and truth together. Timing, method, and context all determine the effectiveness of revealing what has been concealed. Acting too early or impulsively may diminish the impact, while waiting for the right moment ensures that every piece of evidence and every observation contributes to a coherent and persuasive narrative. Through this combination of strategy, patience, and resilience, the betrayal that once seemed insurmountable becomes an opportunity to demonstrate strength, integrity, and intelligence. Ultimately, the experience teaches a profound lesson. No matter how deeply someone tries to undermine you, the careful alignment of preparation, truth, and calculated action creates a power that cannot be denied. It transforms adversity into mastery, betrayal into insight, and injustice into a lasting affirmation of one's worth and capabilities. In conclusion, this journey of facing false accusations, enduring manipulation, and ultimately reclaiming the truth teaches a profound lesson about resilience, patience, and the power of preparation. It shows us that even in the darkest moments, when trust is broken and credibility is questioned, strength can be quietly built through observation, careful documentation, and unwavering commitment to integrity. Every challenge, every setback, and every act of endurance contributes to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the people around us, revealing that truth, when handled with wisdom and timing, cannot be denied. Vindication is not merely about proving others wrong. It is about reclaiming your identity, restoring trust, and demonstrating that justice, patience, and strategic thinking always have their place in life. To everyone listening, remember that no matter how unfair or isolating a situation may feel, persistence, careful planning, and belief in yourself can transform hardship into triumph. Every experience, even the painful ones, carries lessons that strengthen your character and prepare you for the challenges ahead. By staying grounded in truth and acting with integrity, you can overcome adversity and emerge stronger than before. Good luck to each of you in facing your own challenges, and may you find the courage to stand firm, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the clarity to recognize the truth when it comes to light. Thank you for taking the time to listen and for sharing in this journey of reflection, growth, and ultimate vindication.